Okay, so we're going to talk in this video about the diencephalon. This might be a little bit shorter of a video. So the diencephalon is the second major division of the forebrain. And it surrounds the third ventricle. And basically, the two most important structures are going to be the thalamus and hypothalamus. And these are less clear on our model because these are internal structures. So the thalamus actually comes from Greek meaning inner chamber. And so the thalamus really is, here inside here and here. And hypo means below. So the hypothalamus is going to be right around in this area. And so let's look at this on our an MRI image of this. So this is a sagittal view MRI, and so we can see here, this area would be the thalamus. And right now we're kind of in the middle, of the brain, really. And there's two hemispheres to the thalamus, or two lobes. And these are connected by a bridge of gray matter. And this pierces through the middle of the third ventricle. And so, yeah, we've got the thalamus here, but then also, and it's kind of hard to tell in this image, but the hypothalamus is going to be right around here. And then two other important structures that we'll touch on when we talk about the hypothalamus is the optic chiasm, which is going to be right here. And then underneath that being the pituitary stalk and the pituitary gland, which is, it's kind of hard to see here, but it's right in this area. And there is there's an anterior, so rostral, and the posterior part of the pituitary stalk. And just kind of for maybe a clearer picture, we've got this 3D image here. And so this purple part is, or pink, this is the thalamus. And then yellow here is representative of the hypothalamus, which would be connected to the both the optic chiasm and the pituitary gland. So I'll stop sharing and then talk a little bit about these structures. So the thalamus, like I was saying, has two lobes. It's medial in the brain, and most neural input to the cerebral cortex is received from the thalamus. And as we'll talk about in our next video, most of the cortical surface is divided into regions that receive projections of sensory information. And these projections mostly come from specific parts of the thalamus. And so the thalamus is divided then into several different nuclei that send projections through these projection fibers. Some of a couple important ones being the lateral geniculate nucleus, which is related to the visual cortex, the medial geniculate nucleus, which receives information from the inner ear and sends axons to the primary auditory cortex. So yeah, I mean, the thalamus is very important. I'm going to say this about every brain structure because the brain, you know, it's so interconnected and everything is so important. But the thalamus is often described as the relay station of the brain because a great deal of information that reaches to the cerebral cortex first stops in the thalamus before being sent to its destination in different areas of the cortex. So yeah, all of our senses, with the exception of smell, are basically sent through the thalamus before being directed to other areas of the brain for processing. And this structure is able to relay and integrate a variety of motor and sensory signals between the higher centers of the brain and the peripheries. It's mostly comprised of gray matter, but is also surrounded by a couple layers of white matter. And yeah, I mean, it really contributes to a lot of brain processes. It's, you know, historically, research has focused on talking about its relation to sensory relay and visual, auditory, somatosensory, and gustatory systems, but it has more recently been found to be involved in many other functions beyond just this, those primary sensory roles. Some of these additional associated functions include contributions to perception, relaying or playing a role in memory, playing a role in alertness and attention, consciousness and awareness, and playing a role in cognition. Its connections to structures such as the hippocampus and other parts of the limbic system suggest that the thalamus plays a role in memory, especially episodic memory, as well as with learning and emotions. So all of that to say, the thalamus is hugely important, and yeah, contains several nuclei that send out information to the cerebral cortex. And so now onto the hypothalamus, which I already pointed out on the MRI, is just below the thalamus, as the name implies, and slightly caudal too. Not caudal, rostral. And the hypothalamus also is immensely important to the human because it controls the autonomic nervous system and endocrine system. And through this, it organizes behaviors related to the survival of our species. And these behaviors are often referred to as the 4 Fs. So fighting, feeding, fleeing, and fornicating. Yeah, this is a complex structure, and it also contains many nuclei and fiber tracts. The pituitary gland is attached to the base of the hypothalamus through the pituitary stalk. And in front of the stalk is the optic chiasm. And this is a very important structure as well, because it is where half of the axons in the optic nerves, so coming from the eyes, cross from one side of the brain to the other. So naturally hugely important in the process of our vision. And then the hypothalamus, I mean, the hypothalamus controls many different functions in addition to just the 4 Fs. It also helps with regulating hunger, thirst, weight, body temperature, breast milk production, salt and water balance, circadian rhythm, or our sleep-wake cycle, and even childbirth. And yeah, so it's very connected with the endocrine system, which is controlled basically by the production of hormones by the cells in the hypothalamus. So there's a special system of blood vessels that directly connect the hypothalamus with the anterior pituitary gland. And yeah, these neurosecretory cells are located near the base of the pituitary stalk. And these hormones that they release stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to secrete its hormones. One of the important ones being the gonadotropin releasing hormone, which is related to stimulating the gonads. And so the hypothalamus also produces other hormones more than just the sex hormones, and produces hormones of the posterior pituitary gland as well, and controls their secretion. These including oxytocin being a big one, which stimulates the ejection of milk and uterine contractions at the time of childbirth. All of these are produced by neurons in the hypothalamus, with axons that travel down the pituitary stalk and terminate in the posterior pituitary gland. So there's this intimate connection between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, which is seen as like the gland of the endocrine system, in terms of releasing hormones. So yeah, that is the thalamus and the hypothalamus, two more very important structures in the brain. And these are located in the diencephalon, the second major division of the forebrain. Next video, we will talk about more about the forebrain, and about the telencephalon. So the latest developed part of the brain. Yeah.